context as to where the pig enterprise came from, where it sits on the whole farm. And that's this idea that I've been farming for 10, probably 12 years now. And I guess my ambition is to kind of create a farm, or have a farm where everything's in balance, and all the different aspects are complementing each other, and the system works really neatly. The first few years when I was farming, I really felt we were kind of bullying the farm into submission, trying to produce these cheap commodities. I guess we're trying to move to a different mindset where we're always thinking about how we earn the right to grow a crop and produce good food. And with that in mind, earning the right, for me, there's two like big levers that I've kind of moved our farm towards, more kind of regenerative agroecological view. And those are lays in the system and cover crops. And so with the pig system, it was an opportunity to work those, to create a farm gate product for those two aspects of our rotation. And kind of when I'm talking about the specifics, the reason it looks like it does is because I've reverse engineered it with that in mind. I guess thinking back to how my first few years on the farm, it's such a big change in mentality because I was so heavily focused on yield. And the reason I was focused on yield was because I didn't have control of my price. Whereas now we start by asking, how do I want to grow this? Why do I want to grow it like that? Why should I grow it like that? And then we work backwards rather than starting from the point of view of how much do we need to grow and then working forwards. And with all the kind of negative externalities of a production system like that. And you know, we were that conventional system on steroids 8-9 years ago. So the pigs have been transformative. I think in my head when I started, I thought it was going to be an arable rotation with pigs, and now it's a pig rotation with arable. So the specifics, we have only 30 sows. We wean at 8 weeks, and we actually have relatively low kind of litter sizes, between 6.5 and 7.3 weaned alive. We wean at 8 weeks. And that means we're producing about 400, 450 a year. This is purebred Tamworth. And we're finishing at about 85 kilos dead weight, which for us is probably towards 10 months old. And the sows are split into 3 groups. So 3 groups of 10, and they're on a 6-month cycle. So basically every 2 months we're weaning about 60-ish and finishing about 60-ish. And there are 2 kind of parts of the system. All of the breeding and all of the growing up to about 6 to 8 months old is done outdoors. And then for 2 to 4 months at the end, so sort of if it's December, it might be near 6 months old, but at this time of year, it'll be just the final 2 months of a pig's life. We finish them in a roundhouse on a straw-based system. And the 2 diets that we use are, if I start with the roundhouse, it's a TMR diet. So it's about, well done, that's great. So that is basically a bale of lucerne grass silage, which is about a ton, and then 300 kilos of rolled barley, which is homegrown, and about 150 kilos of rolled either peas or beans, also grown on the farm, which basically makes it about a 70% forage-based ration, 20% cereals, 10% pulses. And in all of the whole production system, because we're trying to get grass into the rotation, actually it kind of really nicely sits with the pig's nutritional requirements, because one of the reasons we're so, as an industry, reliant on imported soy is because you can't go higher theoretically than 15% on pulses in the diet, because they've got anti-nutritional properties. So if you're starting with 70% of your diet being forage, whether that's grazed at pasture or in a TMR, and that forage is 18 to 20%, you don't need to go anywhere near 15% on your beans or your peas. So it all kind of like sits in together nicely. So if that's the TMR diet that we feed in the roundhouse, the rest of the year is split into 2, obviously. In the grazing season here, I would say April to September inclusive. And during that time, all the pigs are on herbal lays, probably like 20, 25 whey mixes, And that's a great example of how we're trying to take you guys doing mob grazing as a bit of a kind of, we're nowhere near it, but we're more dynamic than we were, and we're way more dynamic than any other pig system in kind of a commercial sense I've seen. And that is basically grazed for 21 days. Then we've moved over to the right-hand side. We'll graze that for 21 days. Then we've got a third paddock, and then we'll go back to the first one. So we're looking at like a 45 day rest period. And that's how we operate during the grazing season. And it's the same whether we're running like a mob of growers or whether we're running the group of sows. And we're basically assuming, and we have to make a judgment call on this, that they're getting up to 70 to 80% of their diet from forage. And then we top up with a straight 2-to-1 barley beans mix in the same principle as the TMR ration, which is there, yeah. So everything's grown on farm, which is really nice. It's a super low cost system. And although there are plenty of arable crops going into the pig, the farm gate price is the pig. And that's kind of the big change. There's a kind of biological undertone to what we're doing, and the whole mindset has shifted on how we're farming. But there's also that economic side, because if you're still trying to produce a cheap commodity, there's a limit as to how kind of aspirational you can be with your cropping system. So the pigs really have transformed the whole business. And as Anna said, we actually kind of weirdly we took on 150 acres right next door on a 5-year business tenancy from this September. And the reason I say weirdly is because, 7 or 8 years ago, the whole mentality was get bigger, vertically integrate, economies of scale. And one of the reasons we forced to kind of reorientate, because I was 10, 20 years behind everyone else, and I'm right next to an AD plant, and the rents are hideous. And all of a sudden, people having gone this other way, we're now in a position where we can have this really brilliant rotation of 3 years of grass and 2 years of cereal crops, and we can compete with this kind of other model, and with none of the negatives. Anyway, I'll probably leave it to questions, but hopefully is that okay, Anna?
Yeah, if the cover crops, perhaps because you said the herbal lays, you've got a very diverse mix there. What's the difference?
Yeah. So it's exactly the same principle in what we're trying to achieve in terms of the cover crops versus the lays. So between October and February, March, the pigs are just too destructive, and we're trying to keep the lays for 3 years. So we take them off the lays and put them on cover crops. And the cover crops, again, diversity is a big rule for us. It depends on seed pricing and availability, but that mix there would probably have 15 to 20 different things in, and a good range of like warm season, cool season, cereals, legumes, brassicas, and we mix depending on when it was going in the year. What I try and do is have a cover crop that we sow early, so a field or two which actually don't grow an arable crop during the rotational year. And that means that as soon as we get to September, we've got that kind of biomass, 2 or 3 foot high, and we haven't got to wait for another 2 months to get good fodder quality. But the principles are exactly the same. We're trying to manage them to get that 70%. That's the kind of magic number in my head of forage into the diet, because we need to, because our homegrown 2-to-1 barley beans mix, we can't feed as a complete diet.
Right, that's brilliant. And I suppose one sort of almost sort of going back to basics. Why did you pick the Tamworth for your breed?
I think the Tamworth, any rare breed, I think I was after slow growth and hardiness. I think sometimes people can tell you a good marketing story about this breed or that breed, but that's all it is at the end of the day. It's a nice story. I think the key difference to our system is that it's the slow growth, and that's where the flavour comes from. And we have to be producing something that is differentiable at the end of the